Alright, let's get this over with.
And all I've got to offer is sensitivity, intelligence, and charm.
Okay, where to start? For those who are blissfully unaware, Homestuck is a webcomic created by real-life cryptid Andrew Hussey. It began in 2009 and ended in 2016. Sort of. If you don't count the epilogues and Homestuck 2 and Hive Swap and Pester Quest, and you get the picture. Homestuck proper comes in at a whopping 10,030 pages of content. The plot of Homestuck is, you know what? What is the easiest way to describe this? Okay, here's what I'll do. Here's what comes up if you Google Homestuck synopsis. The story revolves around 13-year-old John Egbert and his friends Rose Lalonde, Dave Strider, and Jade Harley. It is revealed that the fate of humanity depends on their performance in the game Suburb? S-Burb? I'm just now realizing that I've never had to say that out loud. S-Burb. During the course of their adventures, they befriend several members of an alien race called trolls. Now, if you've read Homestuck, you're probably thinking that that is a gross oversimplification, and it is, but we don't have 12 hours to talk about the plot of Homestuck today. It's probably good enough for now. I'll talk about more things as they come up. Homestuck is a story that features multiple realities and timelines, etc. Because of this, there are multiple versions of each character, multiple alien races, and multiple histories. This results in a story that has a lot to do with identity. What makes up someone's identity? What makes you, you? Is it how others see you? Is it how you see yourself? Let's talk about it. The simple answer to the question, what is identity, is that there is no simple answer. Your identity is made up of a whole bunch of factors. The me is made up of a bunch of different identities. Identity is already starting to not sound like a real word anymore, so this video is gonna be fun. These smaller identities that make up you include cultural identity, professional identity, ethnic and national identity, religious identity, gender identity, and disability identity. Cultural identity is the feeling of the identity of a group or culture, or of an individual as far as they are influenced by their belonging to a group or culture. Professional identity is the identification with a profession, exhibited by an aligning of roles, responsibilities, values, and ethical standards as accepted by the profession. An ethnic identity is an identification with a certain ethnicity, usually on the basis of a presumed common genealogy or ancestry. Recognition by others as a distinct ethnic group is often a contributing factor to developing this identity. Ethnic groups are also often united by common cultural, behavioral, linguistic, ritualistic, and religious traits. A religious identity is the set of beliefs and practices generally held by an individual, involving adherence to codified beliefs and rituals and study of ancestral or cultural traditions, writings, history, mythology, and faith, and mythical experience. In sociology, gender identity describes the gender with which a person identifies, but can also be used to refer to the gender that other people attribute to the individual on the basis of what they know from gender role indications. Disability identity refers to the particular disabilities that an individual identifies with. This may be something as obvious as a paraplegic person identifying as such, or something less prominent, such as a deaf person regarding themselves as part of a local, national, or global community of deaf people culture. So, Homestuck. LOL. Let's take a look at how these various types of identities are expressed and treated in the real world and in a Homestuck. Cultural identity is the broadest of the smaller identities that make up the whole. In fact, a lot of the other types of identity that we're going to be looking at can affect cultural identity. Like I said, Homestuck is a story that features various alien races, so cultural identity plays a pretty big role. For example, the troll race organizes their relationships into quadrants. I can't believe I'm talking about troll relationship quadrants in 2021. The quadrants are... I'm sorry for the big Homestuck fanatics out there, I'm going to be mispronouncing these. Apologies. Mate sprit. This is the closest relationship to human romantic love. Moral allegiance. This is like a platonic soulmate. Kismessitude. This is a relationship that is a mixture of hatred and attraction. And auspicitism. A third party acts as a facilitator between two other people in one of the other types of relationships. I hope you're taking notes because I will not be repeating this again and it will be on the quiz. Other cultural differences between the troll characters and the human characters are the caste system based on blood color found on the troll planet Alternia, the use of buckets. No, I will not be elaborating on that. And the more violent and aggressive society found on Alternia. Homestuck not only has alien races, but time travel as well. This also works to highlight a few differences in cultural identity. For example, there's kids from the future and past and kind of another dimension. Listen, it's confusing, but these kids from the future, past, other dimension have a completely different cultural identity than the human kids from our time. Most notably, they have a completely different history that informs that cultural identity than the kids from our time, which can result in some conflict. The link from all of this to our world is pretty obvious, right? We have different cultural identities based on the country we were born in or the generation we were born into. For example, the culture in Spain is obviously different than the culture in South Korea. And likewise, baby boomers have a different culture than Gen Z and have lived through different histories. So, let's hop on over to professional identity. The most obvious example of professional identity in Homestuck is the class specs system. Class specs are kind of like D&D classes, but in Homestuck. It's the predestined role each character is destined to fill in the context of the in-world game suburb. I'll save you some brain cells and won't go into the details of each class spec because I love you. You're welcome. Professions in the traditional sense also exist in Homestuck. For example, Rose's mother is a scientist, Jade's grandfather is an adventurer, and Dave's brother is a webcomic creator. Very meta. At least in our capitalist world, professional identity can mean a lot. Service workers tend to be looked down on and viewed as lesser, while white-collar office workers are viewed as successful and well-educated. This view that society takes can very easily be internalized. I remember when I had just graduated college, I took a job as a cashier at Whole Foods. I worked with multiple people with master's degrees and PhDs at this job. But oftentimes, the customers would treat us like we were all idiots who hadn't worked hard enough to earn a spot in their cubicle world.
Future Ellen, recording. What's up?
Oh boy.
Shout out to Paper Stingray for making
Who made these?
Homestucks.
Who made some Homestucks. Okay, get him. Get him out.
This is Loki.
This is Loki.
This is Loki.
I remember one instance where a woman and her daughter came through one of my coworkers' lines. This coworker had a history PhD. When this woman came through my coworker's line, she commented to her daughter, "This is why you work hard in school, so you don't end up a cashier at Whole Foods." This was very obviously hurtful to my coworker. And even though I can't know for sure, I wouldn't be surprised if this incident negatively affected how my coworker viewed her own identity. If you've watched my other content, you probably can piece together that I don't think that our professional identities should mean as much as they do in our real world. It would be much cooler if we focused on being like time wizards or whatever, like in Homestuck. In Homestuck, race and ethnic identity is never really addressed when it comes to the human characters, leaving the characters to be interpreted as any ethnic or national identity that the reader so chooses. Where ethnic and national identity is made clear is with the various alien races, like the trolls or the cherubs. Within the trolls, there even exists this racism metaphor with the blood color caste system that I touched upon earlier. Trolls with certain colored blood are looked down upon and viewed as subservient to trolls with blue or purple colored blood. Honestly, I think this racism metaphor works better than others that I've seen in different media, especially animal racism metaphors. If you want to learn more about why these tend to not work, I highly recommend Jack Saint's video on the topic, which I will link in the description. So, I'm pretty gosh darned white, obviously. And when it comes to ethnic and national identity in our real world, I wanted to get a different perspective. So I talked to my friends Amanda and Rachel. Amanda is Sri Lankan and Rachel is Chinese. Rachel also has an Etsy, which I'll link below. When asked about her ethnic identity, Amanda said that there were times in middle school and high school where she felt almost ashamed of that identity. When she started applying for doctorate programs, a friend of hers told her that she would get in because she wasn't white and could play the race card. She says that she's still navigating what her ethnic and national identity means to her. Rachel recently appeared on a podcast where she talked about her ethnic identity, which I'll link below. In the podcast, she mentions that she obviously doesn't speak for all Asians. She pointed out that it's very rare that white people feel like they have to clarify that they don't speak for all white people, like others in minority groups do. White people don't have to put as much thought into their ethnic and national identities, because in many cases it's seen as the default, at least in the Western world. From these conversations, I learned that ethnic and national identity is something that's definitely more at the front of mind for people of color. Again, religious identity isn't really touched upon when it comes to the human characters in Homestuck. It can probably be assumed that Andrew Hussey was trying not to step on any toes. However, religious identity does exist in troll society. For example, one of the trolls worships the insane clown posse. You have no idea how much I wish that was a joke. Aside from that, the trolls have a mythology surrounding their ancestors, especially the direct ancestor of the troll Karkat, who was basically troll Jesus. A religious identity is definitely less of a joke in our human world. The persecution of people who practice Islam or Judaism in the Western world is very real. According to the FBI, anti-Islamic incidents were the second least reported hate crimes prior to 9/11. But following 9/11, they became the second highest reported among religious bias incidents. From pre-9/11 to post-9/11, a growth of 1,600% took place. This is sure to have an impact on how someone presents their religious identity to the world and to themselves. A religious identity directly affects how you view yourself, your morals, and the world. It also, unfortunately, has an effect on how the world views you. Gender in Homestuck is interesting. As a preface, gender is what's between your ears, and sex is what's between your legs. What's interesting is that the trolls have a concept of gender, but not of sex. The trolls are either male or female presenting, but they all have the same anatomy. They also don't have a concept of what it is to be LGBTQA+, because, well, they all have the same bits. On the human side of things, at least in Homestuck 2, the concept of being transgender is displayed by the character Roxy, who is revealed to be non-binary in this sequel. The characters are all pretty much accepting of Roxy's gender identity, despite the perceived disappointment from their would-be romantic partner, John. In fact, the only person who misgenders Roxy past this point is the antagonist of Homestuck 2, Dirk. Gender identity affects people in a million different ways, whether you're a man, a woman, cisgender, transgender, non-binary, whatever. For example, quite famously, women historically have been paid less for doing the same job as a man. Transgendered people have a lower overall lifespan because of a high rate of hate crimes. Gender identity informs what gender roles you fill. And like with every other type of identity we've been talking about, it also informs how the world sees you and your identity. I'm gonna put a link to some trans resources down below, because it just feels right. Homestuck prominently features a number of disabled characters. Probably most notably is Terezi, who's blind, and Tavros, who is paralyzed below the waist. Neither of these characters were born disabled. Both of their disabilities are the result of an accident. Tavros especially is marginalized in the troll society because of a combination of his disability and his low-ranked blood color. Terezi takes her disability in stride, creatively accommodating herself by experiencing the world through taste rather than sight. Tavros has a more difficult time, constantly being manipulated and put down in his abusive relationship with Vriska. There, okay? I mentioned Vriska. God. I am able-bodied, so like with the ethnic and national identity, I wanted to get the perspective of someone actually in the community. So I reached out to my friends Stacy and Sarah, both of which are disabled as the result of an accident later in life. Stacy said that it took her a long time to accept herself, especially as someone who's not only a part of the disabled community, but also a part of the LGBTQA+ community. She says it took her a long time to work through her own internalized homophobia and ableism. Stacy also clarified that she doesn't think people treat her differently out of malice, but because they don't know what to say or are scared of saying the wrong things. Sarah says that before her accident, her body was her job. She was always doing crazy physical things, trying to make shows happen. After her accident, she now relies on a brace and a cane and can't lift anything over 25 pounds. Her disability identity has directly impacted her professional identity. She told me a story about how at her old job, she asked for a standing desk to better accommodate her needs, and was met with people making her feel like an inconvenience because she needs these accommodations. There's not really a good way to segue this, huh? Okay, so, conclusion time! Homestuck takes great care to touch on the various identities that make up the whole. I didn't even touch on Homestuck's portrayal of sexual identity, featuring a huge cast of LGBTQA+ people. taking the time to explore how these characters discover these identities and how they react to these identities once they're discovered. I guess before I close, I wanted to make something clear. None of us are one single identity. We are made up of a million different things that make us us. We are not just disabled or able-bodied or cis or trans. We are also artists and thinkers and any number of things. We're all super valid and complex. Unless, of course, you're a Homestuck stan. Ah, boy, another video that ended up longer than I was expecting it to. Sorry for talking about Homestuck, of all things, for so long. Please don't unsubscribe. If you liked this video, why not let the algorithm know by giving it a thumbs up, a share even, a subscribe. If you really liked this video, you can become a patron. If you really like this video, you can become a patron. Patrons get fun perks like blooper reels, access to my Discord, $10 and up gets you your name at the end of the video, or buy some merch. The links to both of those things are in the link tree below. If you didn't like this video, how's Kin and Gamzee going? Bye! There are children screaming outside. I'm trying to talk about Homestuck. Gosh. I'll switch to the other side of this mug now. This mug's empty. The other one actually had coffee in it. I just want to show off my Homestuck mugs.